Hello, this is Garrett Eckert with Simple Ministries. Please visit the website at simpleministries.org for more resources like this, unique things that you will not hear elsewhere. The title of this video is Same-Sex Marriage Now What? Now, it has been said that to understand the present, you must understand the past. Never in the history of the world has any society promoted same-sex relationships through marriage until the Netherlands did so in 2001. What led to this same outcome in the United States in 2015? So let's take a look at the past. A little timeline here. This is not all-inclusive, it's just sort of hitting some high spots. Now in 1960, many factors brought about the sexual revolution, including the introduction of the contraception, the pill. This contraception gave new freedom to those desiring premarital sex while nearly eliminating the risk of unwanted pregnancy. 1965, 5 million women were on the pill, and the standard of sex only within marriage was slipping away. Not to say that people were always having sex within marriage, they certainly weren't, but the risk of unwanted pregnancy kept many from not engaging in it because of not wanting children outside of wedlock and the stigma of it. But this being that the pill is nearly in the high 90s effective, people are getting more comfortable with this. In 1969, tired of harassment by police at the Stonewall Gay Bar in New York City, patrons rioted for 3 days and the gay rights movement was born in America. 1970, then Governor Ronald Reagan of California signs no-fault divorce into law. This allowed one spouse to initiate a divorce for any reason without the consent of the other. Prior to that, both would have to consent for the divorce. And this was adopted in all 50 states, the last holdout being New York in 2010. Now the permanence of marriage became optional. 1972, a same-sex marriage case from Minnesota was appealed to the Supreme Court, and the court dismissed the case for want of a substantial federal question. And this is because marriage has typically or almost always been regulated by the state, not the federal government, which is part of the Supreme Court is part of the federal government. 1973, the American Psychiatric Association, after intense pressure from gay groups, changes the classification of homosexuality from a disorder to an orientation. Also in 1973, the Supreme Court legalizes abortion in the case of Roe versus Wade. Now, even if a person gets pregnant, they still don't actually have to have a child. 1986, the Supreme Court upholds a Georgia sodomy law in the case of Bowers versus Hardwick. In 1991, home internet use becomes available and internet porn is piped right in along with it. Before, people would have to go to a store and many wouldn't do that, but now that it's right in the home, people are much more available to them and using it. And this has had a great impact on people's sexual morals. 1996, the Defense of Marriage Act, also known as DOMA, defined marriage for federal purposes as a union of a man and a woman and allowed states to refuse to recognize same-sex marriages granted under the laws of other states. 2003, the Supreme Court struck down Texas's sodomy law and by extension other states as well in the case of Lawrence versus Texas. Also in 2003, the Massachusetts Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in the case of Goodrich versus the Department of Public Health. 10 years later, 2013, the Supreme Court ruled that Section 3 of the Defense of Marriage Act, which held that restricting U.S. federal interpretation of marriage and spouse to apply to only heterosexuals was unconstitutional in the case of United States versus Windsor. And this case was used to then, as people challenged marriage laws around the country in federal court, the judges were looking at this precedent to strike down those marriage amendments on the state level. But in 2014, the Sixth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals upholds one-man, one-woman marriage amendments in 4 states. Circuit courts usually or always cover more than one state. And so that led to an appeal to the Supreme Court, which then legalized same-sex marriage nationwide in the case of Obergefell versus Hodges. Now, to summarize, the sexual revolution promotes sex without marriage, marriage without permanence, pregnancy without children, sex without a partner, and sex without the opposite sex. Now, what have biblical Christians been doing about the sexual revolution? Well, one is that they've been joining it. 80% of Christians 18 to 29 have had sex before marriage. Now, it's one thing to make a mistake and sometime in the past, but 64% of these have done so, had sex within the last year, and 42% are currently in a sexual relationship. Sociologist Bradley Wright did research revealing that the divorce rates among frequent church-attending evangelicals is 34%. So these aren't just nominal Christians, these aren't just cultural Christians, these are the most devout Christians, and still they're divorcing at a rate of 1/3. 20% of abortion patients identify themselves as either born-again, evangelical, charismatic, or fundamentalist. And 66% of Christian men view porn monthly. Now, even if really devout evangelical Christian men are 1/3 better, that's still 44%. And 20% of Christian women view porn. Also, it seems that the biblical Christians are resigned to the sexual revolution. It seems that Christians and leaders seem more resigned to it than trying to combat it. Now, there have been organized efforts against the sexual revolution. In regards to abstinence, there's been the True Love Waits campaign, purity pledges, and an effort to have abstinence-only education in schools. There's marriage ministries, both in and outside of churches. Pro-life ministries have been doing great work, and also pregnancy centers to combat abortion. There are porn addiction ministries, and there's been many legal efforts regarding marriage as well. I mentioned the Defense of Marriage Act, also state marriage amendments, and also efforts to oppose adding sexual orientation and gender identity to civil rights laws. Now, what have the gay rights groups been doing? Well, they've been fighting for legal changes regarding marriage and civil rights laws. That's pretty well known. They've been promoting LGBT curriculum in student clubs in schools. They've been lobbying social science organizations like the American Psychiatric Association to pronounce homosexuality as normal. They've been donating large sums of money to political candidates in return for their support. Just recently, the White House was lit up in rainbow colors. That wasn't nearly just out of the goodness of the president's heart. No, that was paid for. Those lights were paid for, and much more with the lobbyist money. Gay groups have also lobbied media to ban any opposing views. So I know that one network, CNBC, that anybody with an opposing view to homosexuality or transgender, they're not allowed on the air. And also an effort to get as many positive gay characters in the TV and movies. And this is done most notably by an organization named GLAAD. And this might be why you notice on television there's an extraordinary number of gay characters on there, and they're always in a positive light. And if they can then have the straight people posted in a negative light, all the better, such as Will and Grace, where Will, he is the one that's got it all together, and then the straight character Grace is a mess, and always actually going to the gay character for help. And lastly, to encourage gays to come out of the closet and to enlist the support of family and friends. And what is the purpose of all these activities? The purpose is acceptance. That is what it all boils really down to. Now, what is the view of the LGBT movement in America today? Well, they've got all the positive momentum. They're viewed as loving people and champions of equality. What is the view of biblical Christians today? Well, it's all negative momentum on the wrong side of history, that we're haters and bigots, that we are opponents of equality. Now, what are biblical Christians to do? Well, I think the first thing that we need to do is operate from our point of strength, which is to focus inward. Yes, we are really good at focusing inward, and I think that's what we need to do here. And what we need to do is to judge ourselves first and then get rid of hypocrisy. Oftentimes people think that in Matthew 7 verse 1 Jesus talks about not judging, and they think, well, you know, that's exactly not judge anything. But no, he's actually, through this, you have to read the whole passage 1 through 5 to understand that he's actually talking about judging, just simply not as a hypocrite. He says, you know, do not judge lest you be judged. By the measure you use it, it will be measured back to you. And simply put, that just means that anytime you judge somebody, they're going to look back at you and consider the source. They're going to say, or who are you judging me? And if you're someone they respect, they might take heed to you. But if they do not, especially if you're a hypocrite, they'll just discount what you're saying, even if it's true and you have a point. For example, you go to the doctor and your doctor says, well, you know, you'd do well to lose 20 pounds. It would improve your health. But your doctor is 100 pounds overweight. You'll say, well, considering the source, you know, when you lose 20 pounds, I'll think about it. Well, no, your doctor's still right. You should lose the 20 pounds. It would help you. But it's just tough to listen to a hypocrite. And that's what Jesus goes on. He says, hey, why are you trying to take the speck out of your brother's eye when you have a log in your own? Judge yourself. If you determine you have hypocrisy in your life, get rid of it. And then in verse 5, he says, then you can help your brother to see clearly. And so that's what we are to do. We need to get our own house in order, because we wouldn't be here if we hadn't made such a mess of marriage. If we hadn't brought the sanctity of marriage down to the level where homosexuals can enter it, and that's where we've been in the past. They just couldn't enter it. Like back in 72, when gays tried to appeal to the Supreme Court to legalize marriage, the Supreme Court didn't even hear the case. There was just no point in even hearing it. And then in 86, when it came before the Supreme Court about just allowing and legalizing sodomy, and the Supreme Court was like, no. And they talked about a moral standard there. But then, of course, the culture changed and has become now acceptable. What else do we need to do? Well, we need to support biblical teachings and expectations in concrete ways. For example, celibacy. What about marrying earlier? Right now, the average age for Christians marrying is 27 for men and 25 for women. Now, that is a long time for people who are burning with lust since puberty to wait. And 1 Corinthians chapter 7 verse 9 says, if you're burning with lust, then get married. In biblical times, what people were getting married as teenagers. I'm not saying that everyone should marry as a teenager, maybe not even most, but maybe it's something that instead of encouraging our young people to wait until they're way up into their 20s, maybe we should be saying, hey, if this is what you want, you need to mature quickly and be prepared to marry at a much earlier age than what our society and many in Christian homes are promoting. Pregnancy. Now, while Christians should not celebrate pregnancy out of wedlock, what we can do is support mothers who are making the right choice to give birth to their children, and do so with care and compassion, with financial gifts to our churches that can support them, and also local pregnancy centers. I think this is an issue that every Christian should be supporting, is supporting crisis pregnancy centers to support these women having these children. Divorce. We need to support building strong marriages within our churches, and also helping those who are struggling. So whether you got a good marriage or not, to help through seminars, retreats, mentoring, counseling, date nights with church childcare, sermons, Bible class lessons, and more. And regarding porn, we need to create support groups at many different churches. The shame may prohibit many from attending one at their own church, so if we have them all over at many different churches, then church members can be encouraged to attend one at a different church where they won't see their own church members, or them coming in and out of the meeting. Of course, we can't leave it just at an inward focus. We do need outward focus as well. In our personal relationships, we need to build common ground and clearly explain the biblical rationale for sexual morality. We will not be even tolerated in society if people increasingly view our motivations as hateful and bigoted. And I'll leave a link below where you can see why this is needed and how it can be done. The argument about having marriages between a man and woman for procreating is problematic. See the link below for exactly why that is. But ultimately, we need to share the gospel with people, which is the power of God to change hearts and save souls. Regarding civil rights laws, now I'm all in favor of treating gays and lesbians and transgender people equally in the areas of employment and housing and accommodations. But unfortunately, these laws, when enacted, are then used as clubs against Christian people. There's a conflict between them, and I'll leave a link in the below on an article I've written about this. And our law has chosen, our courts are choosing, that when there's a conflict between religious rights and gay rights always trump the religious rights. And so we need to oppose these. I don't think these are even valid. I don't think that sexual orientation or gender identity are valid classes for civil rights. And if we're going to get on board with this, just keep in mind your religious freedom and your very livelihood could be on the line if such measures are passed. Public schools, we need to oppose they've been working on it for over 10 years now, influencing the curriculum in schools and also with student clubs. So both current and future efforts, and the future efforts are really going to come now that we have legalized same-sex marriage in our country, to take away valuable education learning time to teach students LGBT curriculum. In the business community, we need to encourage businesses to focusing on their business and not needlessly alienate conservative Christians with LGBT sponsorships and promotions. And we should back this up by doing business elsewhere if they can. I changed my bank because my bank was a lead sponsor of the local Pride Parade, and I changed to a small credit union where I know that even if they are pro-LGBT, they don't have the money to sponsor a Pride Parade at least. Regarding politics, this is very simple. Vote for representatives who will represent you. And there's a party in our country that right within their platform, it's all on the LGBT agenda. Everything they want is right there. So you just have to keep that in mind when you're voting. And we need to also express our views once these politicians are elected, no matter what party they are a member of, regarding civil rights legislation that I mentioned before. And regarding media and entertainment, we need to limit our viewing of pro-LGBT programming. Because if you're going to look at it's one thing to look at the media just as a sort of a curiosity to see what the other side is saying, but you can also become highly influenced by this. This is the whole goal of having these gay characters, positive gay characters on TV, is that you become desensitized to them, you become very used to them, and you become accepting of them. Our viewing should be guided by verses like Philippians 4:8, which says, this is what Paul says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence or if any worthy of praise, dwell on these things." Now, in conclusion, we need to get informed, and there is plenty of resources at simpleministries.org to help you do that. We need to stand firm and not cave in to the cultural pressure to do so. We need to be shrewd. You know, your very job can be on a line just for a Facebook post, and so doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak out, but we need to be careful about how we do it. One approach that I am using is, if someone confronts me, I'll simply say, well, why should I be pro-gay, or why should I be for same-sex marriage? And the reasons they give are typically just outright fallacious, and I go through these on simpleministries.org to help you address those and figure those out. But most of all, we need to share Jesus. We need the gospel. Advocates for LGBT rights need gospel, and gay and lesbian people need the gospel. This is what is going to truly change the hearts. You know, talking about things is one thing, but what is truly going to change folks is Jesus. And most of all, what's truly going to help them is having Him in their life, being saved of their sins, and being able to be a light for Him. So thank you for watching. God bless you.